So welcome everyone to the Ontology Summit 2025 on conceptualization, analysis, and formalization. Today is the 19th of March, 2025. And we have just last week finished the first two tracks, and we are now at the first synthesis track. And I'm also pleased to tell you that we are now streaming live to YouTube at the same time. So yeah, that looks like the right link. And what I'm going to do is begin with a topic outline and then move to a general discussion. So let's see if this works. Yes. So there were a lot of topics covered at the first two tracks. So it would be very difficult in a short period of time to do it all justice. So I'm going to be doing a very sketchy outline of the topics that were covered. And starting at the beginning is, what is an ontology? So here we are. It is a specification of a conceptualization. But of course, you have to explain what all of that means. And that was taken care of in our keynote session by Nicola Guarino. And we found that conceptualization, analysis, and formalization are all important roles that are played in developing an ontology. And the conceptualization involves both cognitive irrelevant as well as relevant relations, entities, and relations. But a key thing is for the intended models to match the model of the theory. So if we develop a theory but it doesn't match conceptualization, that can lead to a number of problems, such as the false understanding. Two individuals who think they understand each other, but in fact don't. So the two ways in which you might be incorrect are listed in this diagram derived from that talk. You can have unintended models, which is loss of precision, or omitted models, which is loss of accuracy. They both have both of them have their problems when you have a loss of precision or a loss of accuracy. On the other hand, sometimes it's good to deliberately be imprecise. So you do have a loss of precision, but this favors reuse at the cost of reducing interoperability. And the various axioms have different effects. They can reduce ambiguities and misunderstandings, but they can generate new knowledge. And so they can affect both sides of this loss of accuracy and precision. So one important aspect is, if we are going to be disagreeing, we should be explicit for that disagreement. And then Giancarlo Gazzardi spoke at length about what he called unpacking, or explaining the descriptions and revealing the commitments. So an important point is that just being symbolic does not imply that what you've written is self-explanatory. Helps a little, but you really need to unpack relationships and roles in order to gain an understanding. So now the term truth maker and truth bearers came up a lot in the first two tracks. A truth bearer is any statement or proposition that can bear truth. It's either true or false. So it's a bearer of truth, possible bearer of truth. And truth makers are responsible for giving the truth bearers their, their truth value, whether it's true or false. Now, there are a number of tools that you can use during the ontological analysis. These are some of the major tools. There's been a number of discussions on the forum about this, and there can be others. I would just say that these are the major ones. So anyone who is going to be doing a detailed ontological analysis must be familiar with all of these. It seems we have a yes, Mark, I did. This is regarding the streaming. When I started the streaming, I was watching it. That's why I'm on twice. So I can see what's on the stream at the same time as seeing what's on Zoom. And there's a definite delay between the two. Now, models are of different kinds, just as there are different theories. So we can basically see a model as being the model plays the role of truth making. It establishes the relationship to some reality of some kind. Whereas theory is more of the framework, the logical framework for the model. Of course, model is also used in other ways in logic, so it's a somewhat ambiguous term. In any case, the notions can be classified as descriptive, explanatory, and predictive, so that the strength of the model increases as you go from descriptive through predictive. And now BFO is, or is claimed to be, the ontology of the common sense world. And classical physics is, roughly speaking, a proper part of the domain of BFO.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So if BFO is supposed to be common sense, how can we claim that it's a model for science in general and especially for physics? Because, I mean, the first thing that, or at least my understanding of science is the goal is to get beyond common sense. And we usually discard common sense, as we do science. And I mean, nowhere is that more true than in physics, but it's true in other branches of science as well. I mean, Darwinism is very unintuitive. So I find that very confusing.
Well, actually, Barry made the point that you do leave the domain of common sense as you go to very low and very high granularities. So the BFO is kind of more like a starting point. And I think BFO was actually created for biology originally. And Barry and his colleagues are busy working on trying to express physics in terms of BFO, which may involve some updates to BFO.
Okay,
But that's a very good point about this. Yes. Okay.
thanks.
And then there was this very enlightening Michael Greninger's session on Hilbert's sixth problem. So, do ontologies solve Hilbert's sixth problem? That would be quite remarkable if it did. And in a way, yes, it does get quite a ways toward doing it. And one nice thing about the approach, the colore approach, is that if you find that you cannot express your theory in terms of colore, the combination of theories in colore, then you've discovered new mathematics and you can add it, colore. So this is very interesting aspect of this. I'll talk about that a little later. So then an interesting point are observer effects. There are two kinds of observer effects. And this is important for ontology because you have this process of going from your reality or your domain and making judgments to produce your conceptualization and then your model. Now, so you need to fit your judgments with reality. And you can have two different kinds of effects depending on the direction. Reality can constrain your judgments. I mean, you don't have at least theory and have control about physical reality, and it is what it is. But for other kinds of domains, you can actually have it the other way. Your judgment can affect reality, and perhaps even in physics, by delineating the chunks of what is real or what you are judging. For other domains, I gave examples where you go further, you actually can alter reality of your domain. So that being the case, we have to be a little careful. Our ontology development can actually affect reality through effects on judgment, as mentioned above, and on non-commutativity. In other words, the order in which we develop the different modules of a large ontology will affect what we end up with as our ontology. These effects, the order is non-commutative. If you approach your ontology development in a different order, you may very well get a very different ontology. Okay, back in 1960, Victor was impressed by the accuracy and empirical predictions of mathematical theories for physics. But in fact, science actually answers comparatively few problems. Physics, which seems so extremely accurate and successful, is actually only accurate for a very narrowly defined collection of problems within physics. As you move away from those narrowly defined problems, you find that these theories are not as successful, not as easily applied. Barry Smith gave some examples of this, but even at the time of Wigner back in 1960, Gelfand, Pillai, Roberto Poli were pointing out that other fields were not so easily circumscribed. And so they were not so effective, so unreasonably effective. But it's interesting to see that scientists continue to rediscover this. In the forum, somebody listed an article that was written quite recently basically saying what Gelfand said about biology back in the 60s. So it can be a real problem. We have to be a little careful, not to assume that we are going to create an ontology that's going to solve all the problems. Uh-oh, something went wrong with this image. Sorry about that. The diagram came from the presentation by Sawa and Majumdar. If you go to his presentation, you can see that diagram a little more clearly. I'll try to fix it in the a little later. Sorry about that. In any case, generating ontologies is a dynamic cycle that is akin to the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act loop, which includes processes of abduction, deduction, induction, analogy, and testing. And we learned a lot about this during the talk by Sawa and Majumdar. The process should combine both generative, sort of non-symbolic, and symbolic methods. Thank you, Alakan, has shown the actual diagram. So consistency, well, okay, logic should be consistent after all. And while there may be problems with, we may accept a certain amount of inconsistency in our conceptualizations. In logic, it's not so good because if the logic is inconsistent, then you really cannot infer anything. Now, back in 1891, Cantor made the startling discovery that mathematics is inconsistent. And when you look at it carefully, the difficulty was that naive set theory allows unrestricted comprehension. That is to say, you can define a set in any way you want. Make any predicate and you can make that will define a set. Well, that doesn't work. The simplest kind of set you could define that way would be the set where the predicate is true, set of everything. Cantor in 1891 found that the set of everything is inconsistent. Okay, it leads to a contradiction. So Cantor and others developed solutions by restricting the ability to define sets in a number of different ways. So modern mathematics makes use of one of these, but there are certainly other possibilities. It's interesting that Russell, who started his work 10 years after Cantor discovered the inconsistency in mathematics, is often credited with the one who found this. In fact, Russell cited and credited Cantor with this. Anyway, so it's kind of an indication of how mathematicians are not really all that careful about giving credit. But in any case, what about us? What about ontologies? Could they have the same inconsistency? So for example, how should classes be defined? Should we construct them bottom up extensionally? Or should we allow being more conceptual in a top down fashion by necessary and sufficient conditions? That's the intentional approach. Now, the first approach is consistent. I mean, that's restricted comprehension. The second might not be. We have to be a little more careful to be sure that what we are doing will still be consistent. And we had a lovely talk by Oysten Linnebo where he discussed these issues, and I think he gave us a lot of insights into how we should be careful about um, our definitions. After Oystein's talk, we had this talk by Kit Fine about Truthmaker Semantics. This is a concept he developed. And he pointed out that it differs from both possible worlds and situation semantics. The reason that possible worlds are perhaps not the most best approach for semantics is that the possible worlds contain much that is irrelevant to the truth making of a particular state. Possible worlds, after all, are whole worlds with lots in them. And so they contain a great deal that really is irrelevant to a particular statement, proposition. Situation semantics is a little better. It restricts to a state that is part of the world. So this makes things a bit more relevant, but you can still have irrelevancies within a situation. Truthmaker semantics employs states, but it requires exact relevance in truth making. And so there could be interesting aspects of that, which we might be able to discuss as we continue the summit or at the synthesis today. Okay, I grabbed a few challenges and opportunities from the talk so far. This is my last slide. And the framework for ontology generalized to other logics and semantics. And the framework that we have that Nicola so wonderfully and beautifully expressed still makes use of specific logics, specific logic and semantics. Shouldn't we be able to extend, generalize this to these other logics and semantics, like Truthmaker semantics? Another aspect is, as we saw, there's a succession of theories that are stronger, descriptive down to predictive. Could we develop ontologies incrementally by progressing to the more formal, to the stronger theories? Gary has done some work on this, and unfortunately, he couldn't attend today. There's also caution about observer effects, and we should be aware of them during conceptualization and analysis. And could calore restore the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and other fields? Perhaps that's what was missing in the problems that were raised by all these authors like Gelfand. Then another aspect is another challenge is whether ontologies could exploit Unidist style of definitions. These are definitions that are not about entities themselves, but about how those entities sit within their framework. So there are many examples of this actually that already exist. And I mentioned a few of them in my talk, and no doubt there are many others. The question is whether ontologies could start to be more systematic about exploiting these. Mathematicians certainly been doing this kind of thing for a long time. And it's been very fruitful. Finally, there are the issues that I raised concerning ontology consistency. So I threw in a few references. And that's all for my outline.